going this morning? Good. Gosh, it's great to see so many people. This is fantastic. So exciting. So, good morning. On behalf of Partners in Campus and Community Engagement, which, by the way, the acronym is pronounced PEACHY. PEACHY, just so we're all on the same page. The knowing, yeah. After much discussion, PEACHY is where we landed. So, it took 2 meetings. I would like to welcome you to the 4th Annual Inland Northwest Community Engagement Institute. I'm Brian Davenport. I am the Director of the Office of Community Engagement at Eastern Washington University, and I am also the current chair of PEACHY. Partners in Campus and Community Engagement, formerly known as INSLIP, you might have known us by our previous name, INSLIP, has brought together community partners and higher education community engagement colleagues for over 15 years. PEACHY is a regional cooperative of educational institutions, community partners, and other stakeholders committed to the development and promotion of partnerships. We share a commitment to social justice, civic responsibility, and educational excellence in the Inland Northwest. The Inland Northwest Community Engagement Institute emerged from a desire to bring service learning and community engagement professionals, faculty members, and community partners together to discuss service learning and community engagement initiatives, share promising practices, and examine how institutions may become better able to seek community-informed solutions to complex challenges. The Institute seeks to share innovations in service learning pedagogy and scholarship, as well as to further discussions about the meaningful engagement of higher education and communities to respond collaboratively to issues of need. I would like to thank you all for joining us at the 2018 Community Engagement Institute. We hope you are able to connect with colleagues and community partners from across the region, share successes and challenges, and continue to build a regional community of practice. The Community Engagement Institute would not be possible without the generous support of our sponsors. And so please join me in thanking this year's sponsors, Washington Campus Compact and the Southern Poverty Law Center. Thanks to their generous support, we were able to host Marshall Welch, a national leader in the field of community engagement, and Val Brown, an educational expert in the Southern Poverty Law Center's Teaching Tolerance curriculum. I would also like to thank PEACHY colleagues. There was a lot of behind-the-scenes work that went into putting this on, as well as Gonzaga University for planning and organizing today's event. We'll clap for Gonzaga. Yeah. So, as in years past, the Institute invites campus and community leaders to share inspiring stories of initiatives, research, and other such innovative work occurring across the region. Today's Bob Talks, and Bob is an acronym for Burst of Brilliance. Burst of Brilliance. So today's Bob Talk speakers are Dr. Jacqueline Van Wormer, visiting professor at Whitworth University, Mike Tedesco, Executive Director of the Spokane Tribe of Indians, and Dr. Jim Mohr, Vice Chancellor in the Division of Student Affairs at Washington State University Health Science. Each will speak for about 10 minutes, and then we'll wait until all 3 have spoken and then open it up to questions from you all. So our first up is Dr. Jacqueline Van Wormer, visiting professor at Whitworth University. Please join me in welcoming Jacqueline. I can do that right now.
Thank you and good morning. I wanted to thank the Institute for the invitation to speak today, and especially to Ross Watts with Whitworth University. I don't know where Ross is at, but Ross is the director of the Burns Life Center for Community Engagement, and she's fighting it to the university, but also to the community. So if you don't know Ross yet, I am I'm a criminologist, but I'm also what's referred to as a practitioner. And what I mean by that is that I spent 20 years working within the criminal justice system before coming over to academia. I came of age, so to speak, in my career in the 90s, working inside 2 minutes. Ooh, that was great. Any other problems I can come up with here? So for my preliminary examinations, what happens is it's a 3-day exam. Each morning you arrive at an office, you're given a blank laptop, no access to the internet, and you're given a question, and you're expected to write for 8 hours, okay? And in my department, they were really great. They let you look at all the old questions that other students had been given. So I saw these great 3-part questions about like how you go about creating new policy or how you bring about a change in a correctional facility or new law enforcement efforts. And I sit down for my first day of my preliminary exams. So by the way, I practiced on all those old questions, right? So I felt really ready. And I walk in, and my dissertation committee hands me this question. What is justice? So I had like a 30-minute panic attack because this is something, what is justice? That's been debated for centuries. That's, you know, the stuff of legal scholars and philosophers that have debated this question of what is justice. And after I had my panic attack and I sat there for a while, I thought, well, you know, I can certainly think about what is unjust and what is not justice. And what is unjust in our culture is systems that disproportionately target our communities of color, okay? We know that African Americans are 5 times more likely to be incarcerated for similar drug-type offenses than Caucasians. Our jails are full, just locally here. African Americans are 1.9% of the 1.9% of our general population and about 12% of our jail population. I also know that what's not just is punishing those that live in poverty by setting bonds where they can't afford to bond out, by incarcerating individuals because they can't pay their legal fees, because they can't pay court fines. It's also not just to incarcerate those that suffer from mental illness or substance abuse. It's also not just to continue to exact revenge on citizens once they have done their time. In other words, by stripping voting rights and by limiting their housing options, by taking away potential for financial aid and to enter into education systems and to make improvements, to enter into the workforce. And it's this loss of rights that creates continued barriers and weakens the social and human fabric, the human capital of our communities. So I take this question with me all the time, and I think about it heavily, like what is justice and how do we reimagine justice? Can we rethink the criminal justice system to not be about retribution or incapacitation, and instead be about strengthening the social and human capital of our communities to create a healthier community? And how do we do that? So that has led me to really thinking about jail populations. And I'll tell you why, because we spend a lot of time talking about prisons and prison reform, but we really don't think about jail populations. And they're a very large portion of the individuals that are locked up in the United States. And so who is in our jails? First of all, there's almost 12 million annual admissions every year to jails. That's 19 times the number of admissions to prisons. Now, what's been changing over the past few decades is the fact that we have both convicted and unconvicted inmates in our jail facilities. 62% are unconvicted and presumed innocent. Remember, there's a presumption of innocence at that point of pretrial, okay? And they're generally, if they're serving time, it's for less than 1 year. The other thing we know is that these people are also being held for longer periods of time when they're being held pretrial. Okay? So who is in our jails? And again, this harkens back to my notion of like, what is justice and who do we have within our system? Mental illness and substance abuse. Okay? Jails have become a provider of last resort for those with mental illness. Serious mental illness affects men and women in jail at rates 4 to 6 times that higher than the general population. If you were to have someone here today from Spokane County Detention Services, they would tell you that on any given day, upwards of 85% of the jail population has a mental health or substance abuse need. They're in need of counseling, medication, case management, okay? The other thing we know in our jails is, of course, we have disproportionate minority contact. We have racial and ethnic disparities with African Americans being jailed at almost 4 times the rate of white Americans. So the consequences for this, we need to think very heavily about really who is our criminal justice population? It's not this framed and narrative picture that's created to us through the media, through all these crime shows. Okay? That's really not what we see in our criminal justice system. It's this population. And many of them are considered low-risk defendants. We also know that jail creates a criminogenic effect in the sense that when we put low-risk individuals, maybe that are suffering from a mental health issue or that are currently not employed, when we hold them in jail, it actually increases our likelihood to be rearrested before trial by 56%, and they're more likely to recidivate after they serve their sentence by 51%. So if we can get these individuals with all of their needs met in the community rather than through a detention facility, we create a healthier community. We're increasing the social and human capital in our communities. So one place I do find some justice is through a process called the problem-solving courts, because it's a process where the courts take a step back and recognize the unique challenges that many of these individuals are grappling with, whether it be substance abuse, mental health, again, employment, housing needs, and it works to wrap around that individual with community-based resources, with community members, and again, provide services in lieu of incarceration. So there's many of these different types of problem-solving courts: adult drug courts, mental health courts, veterans court. One of the most popular models that's currently emerging is called community court. And you can see here from the Center for Court Innovation, they're neighborhood-focused courts. They're based in the neighborhood, owned by the community. But it balances that power of the justice system to address local quality of life problems. So engaging lots of different individuals in order to meet the needs of this population. So you'd be surprised, we actually find we have a community court right here. You'll find justice every Monday at the downtown library. You can see here the picture over here in the corner. That's where community courts operated. It's now also operating on Tuesdays in Hilliard. Hilliard Community Center has asked asked for this program to be added to their community. Up in the corner here is Francis Adewale, the public defender. If you haven't met Francis yet either, he's a, what was it the newspaper called him, a whirlwind of charisma. He's passionate about these individuals. So the idea of the community court was to address the downtown quality of life problems, the sit and lie individuals, the chronically homeless, trying to get those individuals engaged in services rather than picking them up on low-level misdemeanors and incarcerating them and just seeing them flow through the jail system again and again. And so these individuals come to court in the downtown library every Monday for about 6 months. They work with a team of providers to wrap around all of their needs. The mantra is housing first. And it doesn't matter how serious their addiction is or where they're at in their mental health care, they're going to get them into housing and get them stabilized and then move forward, okay? So these programs are focused on not only reducing recidivism, but again, creating healthier communities and returning this population, returning the dignity. You'd be surprised, we have this perception of the homeless population in our community that when we first opened the community court, the first 3 individuals that stepped through that court, the first gentleman had a PhD from Penn State, the second was a cordon bleu trained chef, and the third individual had a bachelor's degree. And they had mental health issues, they had substance abuse issues, they had lost family and lost connections to the community. Okay? And this program, again, can return that state of dignity and bring about not only reducing incarceration, but reducing recidivism. And that's my time, even though I was given 2 minutes. So I'm going to pass it over, and thank you. I turned it off.
Maybe a quick IT check, make sure you got my mic. We're good. Okay, good morning. Thank you for having me. I am here today to talk to you about Spokane's economic development system. Every community deploys a delivery system to create jobs and quality of life. And justice is actually a big part of this system, for sure. Spokane deploys a model that is ripe for disruption. And so this is my burst of brilliance, is advocating for a new model to deploy when delivering economic development to Spokane. So quick question, show of hands. Is everybody familiar with the Amazon HQ2 proposal process that is actually going down as we speak? Show of hands. That's good. That's really good, actually. Spokane submitted 2 proposals to try to entice Amazon, one from my employer, the Spokane Tribe of Indians, and the other from the system. And the system is led by a number of nonprofits, but chiefly GSI. And this chart, what I like about sitting in a college campus in a room full of very intelligent people is you like charts. So I'm going to sit back just for a minute. And this is Spokane's economic development delivery system graphically displayed. On the left are public sector entities that delegate authority to private nonprofits, and on the right are essentially the business community. Now, this system has 2 fundamental flaws that need changing, and I could talk about this slide for all of my 10 minutes, but I'll just get to the flaws. Flaw number 1 is it's predicated on charity, and charity are those sponsorships, donations, and memberships from the private sector community. This creates 2 fallacies within the system. One fallacy is job performance is based on how much you can fundraise, not on how well you do economic development. That's fallacy number 1. Fallacy number 2, if I want to participate and influence any number of nonprofits that call themselves economic development agencies, all I got to do is be the highest bidder, right? And then it's a pay-to-play environment. So the largest sponsorships, the largest memberships, the largest donations are what capture the ear and influence these agencies, and it's not economic development best practices. So get charity out of the system if we are to compete in a 21st century international economy. Fallacy number 2 is we delegate authority to garden variety nonprofits who unto themselves do not have the authority to entice a hot dog cart to downtown Spokane, much less Amazon HQ2. So leverage authority where authority rests and get charity out of the system. The philosophical approach of Spokane's economic development system is very traditional, and traditional economic development is very jobs-focused, particularly primary jobs, but jobs in general. Attract jobs, attract jobs, attract jobs, and you attract jobs by providing tax breaks, relax zoning requirements, public improvements, mega infrastructure projects like big freeways, all sorts of things. This is all traditional economic development, and this is the philosophical approach deployed by our economic development community. And Amazon HQ2 is infinitely fascinating on a million different levels, and this process that they deployed will be studied for long years to come. This is a traditional economic development project. $5 billion, 50,000 jobs. Jobs, jobs, jobs. But because it's Amazon and because it's tech-focused, they also are deploying other values into what they'd like to see from a community, and that is place. And when modeling incentives to try to entice firms like Amazon to your community, that modeling is based on a tried-and-true recipe that kind of looks like this, and you're not meant to see those numbers. It's just a zoomed-out incentive model that forecasts future tax revenue from folks like Amazon or whoever you're trying to entice, and then you present value that future tax revenue, and that gives you kind of the size and scope of incentives that you can provide to whoever you're trying to attract. This model applies to public sector jurisdictions, and keep in mind, garden variety nonprofits don't levy taxes, they don't speak for your taxes, they have no authority really to give anything. So this is the traditional public sector model that Metro Spokane doesn't even do well. So we're bad at traditional economic development. This is the page from the Spokane Tribe's proposal that models the incentives that we were willing to provide. You know, tribes are sovereign entities, and in a nutshell, that means tribal governments self-govern themselves. They're like mini states. They create their own laws, they write their own tax code, public justice courts, public safety, the whole 9 yards. When you're modeling incentives in a traditional way to try to attract Amazon, you get a lot of infinity symbols there, particularly if you're the Spokane tribe of Indians. Now, although neither proposal was selected as a finalist for Amazon, I can confidently say the Spokane tribe's proposal, monetarily speaking, was the best one Amazon saw. Okay, so transitioning into place-based economic development. So beyond traditional, and Molly, I'll do a time check real quick. 6, wow, I'm ahead of schedule. All right, so this is just, all right, I know, geez, what did I do? This is a little bibliography of what marked a transition in economic development approach, and prosperous international cities of any size compete in an international economy based on this approach these days much more effectively than the traditional approach of economic development. And I won't run through this bibliography all the way other than to dwell on current practices and current creativity that was really discovered, what was bold enough to be experimented with by Jeanette Sadiq Khan, who was Mayor Bloomberg's public works director in New York City. And she came up with the crazy idea of putting cheap plastic folding chairs in the middle of Times Square in lieu of allowing vehicles to go through Times Square. So in one of the busiest cities in the world, in its busiest intersection, she said, let's close it off to cars, and let's spend $5 a chair for the cheapest, shabbiest, ugliest, Walmartist folding chairs we can find and put them right in the middle of the street. So I'll pose this question to you. If I were to, or if Brian or Molly or Gonzaga were to walk into the mayor's office at City Hall, or city council chambers, or even GSI's conference room and say, hey, let's close down the street in front of River Park Square and put some folding chairs, what do you think they would say? They would probably giggle. But it works, and this is the front end of place-based economic development. A new theory has arisen in recent years called community wealth building. Community wealth building, the theory's cornerstone is based on these 2, 4, 6 anchors that leverage the model, and place is a huge part of that. So place systems like your economic development delivery system, local anchors such as Gonzaga and the hospitals and Avista, all of those anchors. Keep the money circulating. Workforce and ownership. I want to dwell on workforce for just 1 minute. I've made several trips down to Silicon Valley over the past couple of years in an effort to entice startup firms to locate in Spokane. And my career training has been in traditional economic development. When I started going down to Silicon Valley, my message was, hey, we got a lot of incentives we can provide. And they were like, what are incentives? We got so much money that we don't know what to do with all this money. We're going to pay our taxes. We don't really have a problem with that. When I shifted my narrative and started talking about workforce, that's when I really started getting traction. Thank you, Molly. I have 2 minutes left. So community wealth building as an economic development model is Spokane's pathway toward the 21st century. Right now, we're still in the 20th century as far as our economic development practice goes. And I'm going to skip this slide. And that practice is illustrated in this model. So if we are to take strides into the 21st century and really be the best mid-size metro in the world, if that's the goal, then we have to reshuffle this deck, take charity out of the system, and stop delegating authority to garden variety nonprofits who have none. So I will close there and conclude. Thank you for your time.
Now it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Jim Mohr to the stage.
If I can get this on my belt.
Please welcome Dr. Mohr.
Thank you. Well, I actually really want to hear the other two speakers keep going. So I cede all my time, and we're going to listen to them some more. And so I'm here today. I'm going to be talking about hate, prevention, and creation. And the reason for this is because in the past 2 years, we've been seeing an increase in hate speech and hate crimes within our Spokane region. For example, we know that both the Salish School and the Martin Luther King Jr. Outreach Center both had a racist graffiti scrawled on their walls. The community building had anti-Semitic remarks put onto their doors, and it hasn't stopped with vandalism. We're also seeing recruitment efforts being made by hate groups into our colleges and into our high schools. So University High School and Central Valley High School have both had this experience, and there are fantastic people trying to work to prevent students from adopting a hate ideology or moving into a white supremacist group. Excuse me. So what I want to look at is that a lot of these efforts are calling for prevention. People are talking about, let's prevent hate, let's prevent white supremacist ideology, let's prevent the recruitment. And what I want to talk about a little bit is that prevention really isn't enough. We really want to talk about creation, because prevention tells us what we don't want to do, where we don't want to go. It's not providing us direction. Creation gives us direction. We know that when we tell people to stop doing a behavior or don't think this, if we haven't provided them with an alternative behavior that is positive, they return right back to the unwanted behavior. There needs to be something in its place. So in my mind, I think what we should be focused on is creation. Creation of an intercultural community, a real intercultural community, not a community that just is multiple cultures that never interact or connect except when there's a problem, but interact on a consistent basis, that work together to solve common problems. So we're going to look a little bit at that. Now, there isn't enough time in 10 minutes to discuss how to do that completely, so I'm going to talk about 4 main social levels and then carry an idea through those 4 levels as an example. So the 4 main levels I look at actually come out of organizational development. It's the individual, small group, institution/organization, if you will, and society. And when we start looking at individual. And one thing I want to stress too is none of those things exist in a void. They're all connected through relationship. Whether it's a relationship of the individual to a small group or institution, or relationships between institutions, or relationships between different types of societies. So let's start with the individual level. Psychology tells us that people have a drive, a need for belonging, for purpose, to be loved, to love, and then there's a whole host of other needs and drives that also exist. I'm most interested in the sense of belonging one for the example. That'll be the example I look at. When people don't have a sense of purpose or a sense of belonging, they tend to be much more open to experience depression, boredom, anxiety, and recruitment into extremist ideologies. That sense of belonging is very important. Now, as an individual, there's nothing to belong to, right? I'm all by myself. So where am I belonging? Well, the first connection to feeling belonging is the family structure. That's our small group. And small groups can be families, it can be a circle of friends, it can be a classroom, right? It's constantly changing as we get older. So it's imperative that we understand how we teach our families to have their children have that sense of belonging in the family. Because yes, your ideas are important. You engage in dialogue with the children. You take interest seriously so they start feeling comfortable and feeling like they can go out in the world and make a difference and be someone and know that they are safe in doing that. Now, small groups can't do it all alone either, because we don't exist in just small groups. We have institutions. Children move out of their families and into schools, and what the heck is going on in our schools with the children, right? So children, and I don't mean, that came out as more negative than I was expecting. That's not how I meant it. But what I meant, the child goes in and is like, what is all this, right? So they're meeting new kids of different beliefs, different ideas, different ways of living, and so there may be some confusion. They don't know how they fit in or how they connect. So the schools are really the opportunity to have the children connect to others. And that can happen in many ways. And there's lots of school teachers who can talk about how they build community in their classroom and in their schools. And it's also, though, looking at the school's policies or our institution's policies. And we could pick any institution. Do our policies encourage collaboration? Do they encourage being part of the community? How are policies implemented? We heard about laws from Dr. Van Wormer about not being implemented properly, disproportionately impacting some people. That creates a sense of not belonging. If you know that you're more likely to be punished for something than someone else, you're going to feel like, well, why am I here? So schools are integral to creating that sense of belonging. And then society. Again, we're back to, right, that's where we're going to get our laws. We're going to see our cultural norms develop through those laws, through regulatory actions, through the actions of our community leaders. We see that start happening. And so, again, if the laws are not implemented properly and equitably, we create a sense of alienation and marginalization. If we have regulatory actions that prevent people from being part of the system, or if we have someone who does become a criminal and go out, how do we bring them back into society as opposed to keeping them out and thinking they have to be completely out? And also, your presentation showed a great example of society with all the businesses and the relationships and organizations. So there's the potential for the belonging there to happen, because that belonging then cannot, if someone doesn't have a sense of belonging, white supremacist groups will take advantage of that. They look for the disaffected, youth especially, and recruit them, because now they have a sense of belonging and sense of purpose. So at all levels, we need to focus on that. Now, there are many other levels and many other ideas and connections, and I can't go into all of those. But what I would like you to do is join me on an imaginative journey for a moment. Imagine that we had an intercultural center of Spokane, similar to what the community building does or what an entrepreneurial center does. But this center would focus strictly on culture. Imagine a center that engaged educational opportunities for schools, for churches, for businesses, nonprofits, and individuals around intercultural consciousness. Imagine a center that could be called for advice on how to build an equitable organization or an equitable city. Imagine a center that creates a community that when hate groups come knocking, no one opens the door. Or, well, maybe the Intercultural Center opens the door and educates some people on how they can be better part of the community. And that would be a good thing. So just imagine a community like that. And then remember that all of us build our community together. Whether we realize it or not, we're building that community. So I'm going to leave you with a question, might be two, might be more, but we'll see. With a question, what do you do to build community? And what kind of community? Is it monocultural or intercultural? Is it fear or hate-based or love-based? Is it shame-based or is it joy-based? Community does not happen by accident. What is your contribution to building a better, inclusive, equitable community? Thank you.